everybody, and welcome. We are thrilled you could join us today for On Being in Each Other's Care. My name is Alex Elliott, and I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, which is a nonprofit university located in San Francisco. As many of us are descendants of settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those who were forcefully brought to this continent, we, CIIS Public Programs, must recognize and never forget that our university's building in San Francisco occupies traditional, unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. If you're interested in learning more about Native lands, languages, and territories, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. Before we get started, I have a few general tips and some troubleshooting items to go over. We are going to be having a live Q&A after the conversation this evening for any of you who are watching this stream live. Please submit your questions at any time using our web form, which is linked in the event description just below this video. Our presenters are going to pull questions that were submitted on that form after their portion of the talk, and we will try to get through as many as we have time for. We do have automatically generated captions enabled for this event, and you can toggle those on and off using the closed captioning button right in YouTube. Chat is enabled for this event, but please note that it is not being moderated and our presenters cannot see that chat. Chat is not required to fully experience the event. If you do choose to participate in chat, please be respectful and avoid language that could be offensive or insensitive to others. You can turn that chat off at any time, and we encourage you to do so if you're finding that it is negatively impacting your experience in any way. If you're having any issues with your audio or video, we always suggest that you start by refreshing the page, and then if you're still having issues, it can really help to go into your video settings right within YouTube and lower that video quality. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, Elizabeth and Stan, and then we will get right to their conversation. Dr. Elizabeth Markle is a licensed psychologist, speaker, writer, researcher, and associate professor of community mental health at California Institute of Integral Studies. She's the co-founder of Open Source Wellness, an Oakland-based nonprofit offering experiential behavioral health and wellness via a community as medicine approach in collaboration with healthcare providers and insurers. Dr. Markle is a thought leader in the field of health and wellness and serves as a consultant for her unique insights and expertise in clinic community integration, innovative approaches to mental health, and group facilitation. Dr. Stan Tatkin is a clinician, author, researcher, PACT developer, and co-founder of the PACT Institute with Tracy Boldman Tatkin. Dr. Tatkin is an assistant clinical professor at UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine. He maintains a private practice in Southern California and leads PACT programs in the US and internationally. He is the author of In Each Other's Care, We Do, Wired for Love, Your Brain on Love, Relationship Prescription, Wired for Dating, What Every Therapist Ought to Know, and co-author of Love and War in Intimate Relationships. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Stan and Elizabeth.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, Dr. Stan Tatkin. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening.
Thank you. I'm going to pin you so I can look at you straight on.
Perfect.
It's good to meet you.
Yeah, well, I'm so grateful that we have some time here to have a conversation and then to take questions from our audience. We have a diverse audience here with us today. There are students in mental health, there's the general public, there's CIIS community members broadly, and so I'm hoping our conversation can really be sort of wide-ranging.
Me too.
Great. So I'm wondering if you can start by just telling us a little bit about who you are and how you came to be interested in dating and partnership relationships.
It's strange, isn't it? If you're like me, you look backwards and everything makes sense. You go forward and nothing makes sense. I think it's the fog of the present and the future. So I actually come from a show business family in music. And so I grew up in music, was a professional musician for most of my young years until I was 26, and then I quit. And I floundered, and then I had my best friend at the time was a studio musician, as was I, and he was a psychologist, and he introduced me to a fellow called Hal Stone. Some people might know that name, voice dialogue. And Hal was my first mentor and suggested I go back to school and get my ticket. So I did at around 29, 30, and I never looked back. I loved this field, and I still do. So I was trained early in systems, structural and strategic family systems, which is in PACT, my approach, and Gestalt psychotherapy, which is in my approach, group psychotherapy, which isn't, but there are some things that from the Tavistock group that are very much a part of PACT. And then I lucked into finding a place at the John Bradshaw Center. There was an opening, and I was very lucky. And at the time, I wasn't really that into John, but I started to get there, and I was a lead group psychotherapist at 2 hospitals, and really cut my teeth on being, in a hospital, inpatient, working 2.5 hours each. Well, no, 2.5 hours intensive ab reactive group psychotherapy, and boy, that was really something. And because we attracted a lot of access to people, I became enamored with James Masterson, who developed self and object relations therapy. And so I immersed myself in that work and focused on personality disorders, and he became a mentor of mine. Then drugs and alcohol, I looked into that program too, being a director of a drug and alcohol program. Anyway, fast forward, Alan Shore became another mentor of mine, and I got knee deep in attachment theory, infant brain development and attachment theory. Arousal regulation was something that I started to become fascinated with, and in neurobiology. Everything changed from there. Got into prevention work through the Watch, Wait, and Wonder program up in Canada, where I thought that's where it is. Work with infant care and infant caregiver dyads in the prevention of personality disorders, eating disorders. And we had a very hard time getting people to come in at this country for prevention. And so I switched to adult coupling, adult pair bonding, which I found there was just about a 1-to-1, similarity between infant attachment studies and marital outcome studies. And so there you go. Also, I went through a divorce around that time. And so I was also motivated to figure out what happened. And so in my interest to find out what went wrong, and combining my studies, I started to develop PACT, which is a polytheoretical approach that incorporates things I just told you, along with social justice theory, psychodramatic work, and more. So we can talk about some of those things.
Oh my goodness. Well, you have done it all. And that is one of the fascinating things about being in the psychological field, is that we're doing it, but we're living it, right? We're living our relationships, we're living our divorces, we're raising children, we're interacting with friends and in our own pair bonding context. So I appreciate you naming that as part of your process.
I think we pick what we do based on what
Sure.
we need to know.
Don't we though? Well, okay, so you've written a whole number of books, and many of your earlier works talk about attachment and developmental neuroscience and secure functioning, and from a sort of an intellectual and a research perspective. And one of the things I love from the intro in this book, which looks like this, there we go, is that you say this book is a hands-on repair manual. So I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit about how you'd contextualize this book as part of the larger arc of your work.
I think this is a pandemic book. I wrote this during the pandemic, and truth be known, this came out of a 3-contract deal, and there was one more book that was supposed to be written, and it was supposed to be the transcribed version of Relationship Arc X, which was a direct-to-audio book. Turns out, audio doesn't transcribe very well to written, so I had to scrap the whole thing, and I decided it'd be kind of fun to write, according to all the complaints that I see in my clinic. And then to really focus on the 2 main things that I started to be concerned about during the pandemic with what I saw around me and what I experienced with my couples. And that is relationship structure. I found that couples are the only union or alliance where people will get together without a shared purpose, without a shared vision, without an idea of themselves apart from feelings and emotion, right? We got together because we're in love. And that's great. And I am really a romantic. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts of the adult primary attachment system, feelings, love is not enough. In fact, it actually can be a problem, and it should be run like any kind of a union among free people based on terms and conditions. And yet couples don't do that. And so, 2 major problems I saw that will crash and burn any union or alliance is a lack of a purpose, why we're even doing this thing, right? Kind of a deal or no deal, and the manner in which you and I will interact when one or both of us is under stress. This has to do with a neurobiological issue of threat, because like other mammals, we have an acute survival instinct and a brain that has what's called a negativity bias, and so we're easily threatened, small t threat, by faces, voices, tone, movements, gestures, words, phrases, and that this factors into all relationships, but especially the primary attachment relationship, which is different than any other. So I thought I'm going to focus just on this and drive that point home.
Beautiful. So when I think about the folks who are here with us tonight, we have the attachment theory geeks, right, who have a whole bunch of language about anxious and avoidant and clinging and distancing and islands and waves. And then we have folks who are maybe interested more broadly in the field of psychology, but don't have that. And so I'm wondering if we could lay just a little foundation and pick some language we want to use to speak about this.
Sure. Well, in the first book, Love and War, we talked about, use the traditional nomenclature for attachment that Mary Ainsworth used, insecure ambivalent and insecure avoidant and secure, and different variations that have come along since then. In the second book, I changed it to something of a nautical theme because I figured that people probably didn't appreciate hearing things like angry, resistant. It's not, first of all, it's hard to say, and it sounds pejorative. It really isn't when you study infants. When you see infants, you can see the anger and the resistance in the body. But adults, I think, take it differently. So I decided to make it islands, anchors, and wave. Islands being the anxious avoidant. People forget that side of the aisle is anxious. Anxious, ambivalent is wave, and then keeping with the nautical theme, secures are considered anchors. So we can use
Beautiful.
that terminology because it's a little friendlier.
Wonderful. Well, I so want to get into all of this around relationship structure and shared principles of governance, which I love as a nonprofit leader, because I think about these so much around a nonprofit, and I haven't necessarily applied them to the relational world. But before we go there, I want to bounce an idea off of you. I think, most of the literature around attachments tends to speak about attachment style as a trait. Like, you are a person who tends towards being a wave, or you are a person who tends toward being an island. Yeah. And that makes sense. And what I feel like I see in relational dynamics is that people polarize each other on a continuum. So if you have two people who tend to be anxious, one of them will out anxious the other, and the other will become more avoidant. Is that your experience as well? Could you speak to that?
Absolutely, because like most research that looks and tries to categorize people, whether it's some kind of a medical condition or it's a psychiatric categorization, is really trying to look at aggregates of people, not real people, aggregates of people. And then we come up with a basic idea of where to locate somebody. So attachment, or any developmental model for therapists, is very, very useful to locate the general area that somebody might be in. But in order to locate an actual person, you need people skills, and right? Otherwise, it's just a category. When you get into systems, two or more people, all of these break down because you're dealing with a phenomenological intersubjective system that cannot be understood simply by looking at the individuals. The system becomes its own animal and begins to react to itself. So quite rightly, people who are secure will bounce between being islandish in the distancing group and being clingy in the clinging group, right? Or waves. That is a function of being relatively secure, if not secure, and the dynamics between two individuals who are constantly shifting and changing depending on their state, depending on time of life, depending on a lot of factors, either clinging or more distancing, and that will get the other person to do, or what appears to be, insecure attachment. So here's the thing that's important, is when looking at attachment in couple systems, in a two-person system, we're looking at people who cannot do anything other than what they're directed to do based on an intense, constant fear of either being smothered, engulfed, co-opted, having their independence, their autonomy, their things taken from them, or preoccupied continuously with rejection, punishment, abandonment. And those are the people that we will pay attention to clinically, because they're predictable. We know what they're going to do based on what they're afraid of. And that's what's lovely about developmental theory, is that if we understand it, we can pretty much guess from a person's presentation what their experience in childhood, infancy might have been like. Doesn't mean we're right, but it's a good guess. And then we investigate. Also gives us a good idea of how we might predict what they'll do under certain circumstances. The same with personality disorders, because people who are rigidified by their fear, by their need to protect themselves, whether it's pain avoidance or pleasure seeking, are predictable. They're directed by their avoidance of pain. And so they're compelled to do the same things again and again. That's actually a feature, both in love relationships, but also clinically. Here's the problem. I didn't appreciate, when I wrote Wired for Love, the human need for categorization, but also the general tendency to use categorization as a cudgel, as a mallet, a hammer to beat each other up with.
Oh, amen. Yeah.
And themselves. We live at a time where the popularization of medical and particularly psychiatric and psychological terms are being used on social media in a way that's wildly misunderstood to otherize people. And that part I don't like being a part of. I think it's good to know I am inclined to do certain things because I'm afraid I remember what happens to me when I depend on somebody, to take responsibility for those behaviors, those reflexes, because they're not secure functioning. They generally lead another person to feel threatened. Good for me, bad for you. And it's good for me to know you and to know what you're afraid of, so I don't reinforce it. And I also know how to help you, right? So these are the reasons I wrote about attachment orientation organization. Unfortunately, it's the most popular thing from the book because people love these terms and love to self-identify and identify their partners. And,
Yeah, we sure do. Well, I so appreciate the nuance you're bringing to that and the normalization of some fluctuation between feeling and enacting more anxious or more avoidant states, but it not necessarily being a locked-in trait. So,
right.
Yeah.
In each other's care, I really wanted to emphasize that the real problem in relationship isn't personality, isn't gender, isn't sex, isn't culture, isn't religion, isn't whether you're an island anchor, a wave, or a duck or a dog. It is the human primate. The human condition is the problem.
So good. Yes, you have a chapter called The Problem of Being Human, aka Why We Are All Pains in the Ass. And I love that so much. Yeah. Do you want to say a little bit more about that human nature piece?
Well, if you're a student of anthropology and history and civilizations, and how hard it's been to get people to get along and not rob each other, rape each other, steal from each other, do bad things, it's always been a social structure, a container, whether it's fear of God smiting you, that's fine if it gets you to behave properly. Or laws, you go to jail. But there's always been something that has countered the human primate tendencies, which are built into our species. And that is, one of them is selfishness and self-centeredness. It's always been there, always will be there. Being moody and fickle and opportunistic. Opportunism is built into our species. Check out a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old. Imagine, God forbid, giving that child an AR-15 and all the rights of an adult. It wouldn't last very long because those children really exemplify what we are. And that is, like I said, opportunistic, xenophobic. We get upset about our racism and deny it. It is built in. We otherize anybody, anything that is too complicated, too different from ourselves, or as Harari says, too familiar to ignore, too difficult or to tolerate. And then we otherize. We do that with our neighbors. We do that with our partners. We even do that with our kids. So to not understand that is to be unprotected and to be naive. We should always plan for our devils, and so should partners in a couple, not your angels. Stress is the factor. And as soon as we are under stress, we will revert to a one-person psychological system of I, me, mine, and you. Every time. That's normal. That's everywhere. That's the problem. And to understand it is to be able to harness this. Understand our own mind is part of growing up. That our mind plays tricks on us, that it tells us things that are not always that important or true at all. Right? And that we make things up constantly, including the lovely part of a relationship. but also the not so lovely part of why you're flawed, right? And what's wrong with you, and why I'm unhappy. Oh yeah, it's because of you.
Of course it is.
So this I wanted to drive home because I am worried about not just couples, but also where we are right now in our own country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the psychological principles and the foibles of humanity are things you're speaking to that don't just emerge in primary relationships, although we sometimes give ourselves more license in pair bonding to act poorly than we maybe do in our professional settings.
That's because adult pair bonding is the only system where there is a very long memory going all the way back to infancy. That's the attachment issue. It's also memory, but also entitlement, expectation, the feeling that we're family, which we're not. We're strangers, right? So there are all these mistakes of the mind that's normal, but can be catastrophic if we don't understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really kind of a wild setup if you think, our earliest patterning is of being very small and helpless. And when we were upset, all we could do was yell and then yell louder, and then somebody made it better, right? What kind of conditioning
Hopefully.
and learning is that? Yeah, if we were lucky, somebody made it better. And we sort of bring that into our adult partnerships, that if we protest louder, there's an expectation that, you should make it better.
That's interesting, because if you study babies, and I did for some time, I recommend everyone do that who's in this field. You start to see this in the clinging group. The clinging group, one of the features is a lot of signal. They signal loudly and they signal strongly because they had to in their early formative years before they can remember, actually. And the folks in the distancing group we see as stopping signaling very early. It's muted. They no longer signal in their face. They no longer protest. They adapt quite differently. And it's not rocket science. You see it over and over again with these babies and these very young children. And that's really what we are, is grown-up children. The same thing happens. So the signaling thing is really key in the attachment world.
Yeah. Okay, so that's who we are. That's the conditioning we have. How on earth do we make it work when there's two grown-up children in a system trying to get along? If you had your 3 minutes with the whole world listening, what would you say is the path to health and happiness and sanity in partnership?
At the top is, if you are an alliance in a union, part of that is a duty to show up and to be a working member of that union. In this case, there's only two, unless it's polyamorous. There are more people, that's fine, but there's still not 100 or 1,000, right? You are the executives, you are the generals, you are the top bosses, you are the legislators. You shape and mold your world. You shape and mold what the relationship should be and what your culture should be, not anyone else. That takes care of all the other factors, because it doesn't really matter. In the end, it doesn't really matter if you are insecurely attached. What matters is that you're forming an alliance that has a purpose of protecting each other from the quite dangerous environment, always has been, unpredictable, indifferent to your interests. The two of you are creating social contracts to ensure the things you want to ensure: your safety and security, your happiness, your physical well-being, your creativity, your joy, everything. Two people can decide to do that if they wish, but they have to agree. They have to find a way to find where they're the same and where they agree. Unfortunately, because we're energy conserved animals, we do the least amount necessary. We're lazy. And we would rather look at where we disagree and where we're different. And that's an illusion, because we're always different and we always disagree. Where do we agree and where are we the same? Smart people that are unionizing others know this. Otherwise, they would never get people to join. They would never get people on board. If you think about how this country was formed, and just the romantic version, but there's some truth to this. How do 13 colonies get round up to give up their cushy life, especially if they're further in than the East Coast, to fight the British, to join a union? They have different cultures, these 13 colonies. How is that done? How do they lock each other in and find where they would agree and where they are the same, where they would both profit from this? That's a lot of work. You're only 2 people, or 3 or 4, depending on your arrangement. Come on. Why can't you do that? We can all do that. Everyone can do that. That's been done throughout human civilization. In couples, for some reason, people just don't think this way. And that's the answer is, in an adult relationship of free people, it's based on terms and conditions, deal or no deal, not love. What are we going to do for each other and what are we never going to do? So say us both. 2 people can do that, and they have to do that. Otherwise, they'll fight. If you and I are pointing in 2 different directions and we want 2 different things in relationship, we're not going to get along. It just makes sense. I'll be operating according to what I think this relationship is, and you'll do the same. So this is, I think, the most important thing, and then we can get to why it's so hard. But first, people have to understand how unions and alliances work across the board, and have to play by those principles. It's a team sport. It's not a solo sport.
Got it. Well, I love this around really thinking through shared purpose, shared vision, shared principles of governance. What are our agreements? And if I can play devil's advocate, the thing that comes up for me is that, early on, it's easy to sort of name these principles and values, and here's what we're up to. And then 15 years later, when somebody gets sick or there's a financial crisis, the interpretation of those principles can be very different. So I don't know if you have the magical contract that lays out every detail that you do in the beginning, but how do you navigate when 15 years down the road you have very different understandings of what that means? People
change, and part of this is looking ahead, looking downstream, and not just looking what's in front of you. What could possibly go wrong? We're going to change. Things are going to happen. We're going to go through developmental stages, and if we're different ages, or if we're out of cohort, that's 10 years. We're going to go through these changes differently at different times. So that's a consideration. The question is, are we planning as we go? Are we constantly looking ahead and not backward to see what's next? Are we in constant contact with each other to make sure that the relationship is what we want it to be, and that we're constantly molding and shaping it like a block of clay? You and I are constantly shaping it to our desire, not somebody else's. That is more likely to work in the long run than any other system. There's no guarantee. There's never a guarantee. Mm-hmm. But there is a likelihood in insecure functioning relationships that they will not last long, or if they do, one or both people won't be happy. This we know. So it's hard to do secure functioning. It's hard to be at the helm and to be both drivers, no passengers, to be both generals, having to share power and work collaboratively and cooperatively. But there is no other system, if you really think about it, that can work in the long run. Any other system turns out to be too unfair, too unjust, and too insensitive to last, and will accrue a lot of memory of resentment, injustice, and threat. And if The unfairness doesn't get you. The biological problem will. And that is we start to build up threat cues to the point where we cannot even be in the room with each other without our heart rates and blood pressure going up because we've accumulated too much inflammation and too much threat. So that's why I say either of those two things, if they're not in place, will destroy any union.
Okay, there's so much to talk about here. I realize we're using the terms secure functioning and insecure functioning. Would you just take a moment and sort of flesh those out?
Secure functioning isn't the same as secure attachment. Secure functioning is a set of social contracts based on social contract theory and social justice. Social justice as it pertains to the couple or the system only, not the greater system of social justice. I get into that with my students very often. We have to look at what the couple considers fair and just, not what we consider fair and just. There are a lot of couples I see that do things that I don't think are very fair. They're okay with it. It's none of my business. People could decide on, there's one master and there's the other person is more of a servant. I don't like that. But if that's part of their culture and they fully agree, and I've vetted them to see if they're being honest and if it's really true, I can't speak about it, right? The two of you could be drug addicts and barfly couple, right? You're drunk all the time, you're stoned all the time. You're fine with it. I don't touch it. I worry about your safety. And if there are kids in the house, then I worry about theirs. Otherwise, it's none of my business. If one of you has a complaint and feel that something's unfair or insensitive, now we have business. Now we have something, because that's a matter between the two people, and that's where I come in. So we take no stance in terms of what people decide is a good life and what they believe is right. But they have to come up with what they think is right and what they think is a good life, not somebody else's. And most people come to the table with no idea except their earliest one, which is the one provided by their family of origin.
Okay, so secure functioning is what has to be generated between the two people and then enacted day in and day out. For
day in and day out.
Yeah.
Relationships don't exist except in our heads. It's an abstraction. You can't take a picture of a relationship. You can only take a picture of people. So if it's a shared mythology, you and I better have the same mythology. Otherwise, there'll be trouble. Just like we have to have the same idea of what is a good life or what we should or shouldn't do. If I want polyamory and you want monogamy, and I can't get you on board and you can't get me on board, that's a deal breaker. It cannot work. It cannot. It's like a cancer cell. Neither are wrong and neither are right. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with we're pointing in different directions and we're expecting to be able to solve problems together and create new things. And that's not going to happen. Same thing if I want a baby. I've always wanted children. You hate children. You'll never have children. And then we go buy a house, which is what people do. That's a recipe for trouble because we're just not going to be able to work together. It just makes sense. Yeah. So those are the things that have to be vetted and people have to be very honest about, which is really, really hard. All of it's hard.
Absolutely. So there are those big structural things that are deal breakers and would be deal breakers if we were paying attention from the beginning. And then, the way you structure this book, there's a bunch of this sort of foundational information in the beginning. And then there's the conflicts, right? You go through sex, money, cleanliness, timeliness, politics, all of it. And you sort of walk us through an interaction and then break it down. Could I read one of these interactions? Partly because they're brilliant and funny and a little painful. Yeah, would that be okay for something for us to look at? So the complaint is my partner drives like a maniac, and the scene is a couple's in the car driving through a rainstorm. Partner A says, please put on the windshield wipers at high speed. I can't see what's in front of us. Partner B says, I can see, and that's all that matters. Partner A says, you're going too fast. What if a car is stopped ahead? Partner B says, I have the automatic system set. It'll detect an object that approaches. Partner A says, what? What do you mean by automatic system? This is not the time to use that. That's for good weather and good vision. Please don't do that. Partner B says, you're going to have to trust me. I know how to drive. Okay, and this goes on, right? And it just gets more and more agonizing to listen to.
You know, what's funny is that the other day we were here in Hawaii and I did the same thing. I did just that. I said, but I can see. And Tracy, my wife, she knows about secure functioning. She knows it. She said, hey, you can't do that. I said, you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so these, this is not one of those deal breakers, right? But these are the things that drive people up a wall. What does secure functioning look like in that kind of context?
Well, to say what I said is one person thinking. It's good for me, but it's not good for my partner. In a two-person psychological system, there's an acknowledgement of interdependency. We have the same things to gain and the same things to lose. We are in each other's care, literally. And so it's absurd because, first of all, the passenger clearly has no control. We could go probably back to the days of the buggy whip, and people probably fought in the wagons. Why are you doing that? There's a mud there. It's going to spray on me. So this matter of being in control, and I'm in control, and you're doubting my ability, it has been around, but it is absurd when you think about it. It's no sweat off of my back to respect and to care for the person who is a passenger, has no control. And so these are the things that we will do, all of us. And some people might think this is strictly male, but it really isn't. It really isn't. And so, a two-person psychological system is one where it has to be good for me and you, or I will pay for it. I will. It doesn't make any sense. Anything I do to you comes right back to me. There's no separation there. We are separate individuals, but we're bound by having the same things to gain and the same things to lose. If I do something at your cost, I'm going to pay for it. There's just no way around that. So we consider it self-harming. To think of only oneself, because we're not alone. Everything we do impacts the other person, and we have to think like we would, the military, special forces. You cannot be in special forces unless you drink the Kool-Aid, which is you're nothing. The person to your left and to your right, they're going to save your life. That's what's important. And so they embed in the culture this idea that this is an interdependent group. Your lives depend on it. The same thing in other groups too, right? Teams, same thing. You can't have somebody acting as if they're the only person on the team. That destroys morale and it loses games. So it destroys the purpose. This is a reorientation, a cultural and moral reorientation to we're bound together. Our fates are tied. Therefore, I have to think of you at the same time I'm thinking of myself, or you will confuse me as an adversary. And that's exactly what happens when we think in terms of one-person system. It is good for me. It's really threatening to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
Go ahead. Well, I am glad we're just naming how big of an orientation issue this is, because in this day of conversation about self-responsibility, autonomy, not being codependent, individuation, empowerment, the list goes on, that the idea of being clingy or needy or codependent is sort of like, oh God. So yeah, how would you guide people towards really thinking in a healthy two-person psychological system?
It's not a matter of health. It's a matter of tactical, practical, can you exist? Can you get anything done? We've come a long way. Our culture has shifted from a traditional life of complementarity and dependency to independence. Murray Bowen. Let's get away from the lack of differentiation and stop talking about we, I, me, you. What do you think? And that led to, that was part of the culture. If we look at the politics of the time, our psychology shifted in lockstep with it. So then we get to Gestalt and, you do your thing and I do my thing. And if we should meet in the middle, so fine, that's great. And then we went too far. We started to deny the nature of what we know about human primates. We are pack animals. We are dependent animals. Any allusion to anything else is just a fantasy. It does not exist. There is no such thing as a self-made person. That's hogwash. So we started to deny our nature. And when we do that, problems will arise. So the idea of collectivism or interdependence is not codependency. We're bound by the same principles and the same laws, agreements that we make based on fairness and justice, equality, shared power, shared authority. You can't do that. I can't do that. Codependency is one direction only. I will do all these things for you, and I hope you'll return them, but I don't command you to. And if you're not going to do that, I'm out. No deal. Interdependency are two separate individuated individuals who can tolerate pain, can tolerate grief, can tolerate differences and know how to work with them by holding each other to the same fire that we agree to. That is a discipline and a rigor that is different, right? We're still independent, autonomous individuals. We're expected to be, but we're bound as a team, as a survival team, as a creative team, as a parenting team, to work together, or nothing works. Nothing works, right? Think of a potato sack race. If you and I can't work together, we don't go anywhere. We fall.
Yeah.
That's it.
And what you spoke of is that the consequence of not doing that is that our nervous systems start to confuse each other for adversaries. And you wrote,
absolutely,
threat perception is the single most underrated cause of relationship distress.
It is.
Would you say more about that and the whole idea of leading with relief?
So if I don't, if you feel in this system that I'm talking about, if you and I are partners and I act as if I don't care about your interests or your concerns or your worries, you will start to harness and use your own personal narrative to protect your interests. I will compel you to do that because I'm doing that. We'll square off and we'll be adversarial. Everyone will do it. It doesn't matter where you are in the globe. Everyone will do it. So that's folly in a two-person system, in a team where we have to do things. We have to work together. If I hurt you, and that doesn't mean whether I think I did, but if you feel hurt by me, misunderstood by me, and I don't fix that as real, you will start to see me as a threatening person. Everybody will do that. Therefore, it's in my best interest to care about your perception as real and apologize, fix it, repair it, make amends, make it right, do something to relieve you right away. And there's two reasons for that. One, long-term memory is formed by adrenal subproducts and adrenaline and glutamate. Anything that's too intense and lasts too long, stays online too long, will go into long-term memory. If I don't fix something with you immediately and I let it sustain, I created that memory in you. And you're going to remember this for a long time and refer to it when anything similar comes around. Now, I may blame you for this, but that's stupid because I caused it. That's my doing, not yours. So if we don't repair things right away, this is a practical, tactical thing, we're actually forming long-term memory in the other person, which we're going to have to litigate in the future. So that's one problem. Two, if we are, that's interpersonal stress that's being created in inflammation, literally inflammation, by the way. If I don't fix this with you, you start to build a sense of danger and threat, which shortens lifespan. So interpersonal stress, we have to remember, chronic interpersonal stress leads to a shorter lifespan. We know this leads to a breakdown in all systems, cardiovascular, inflammation, autoimmune systems, and diabetes is a
Endocrine?
metabolic. Thank you. Same thing. A metabolic problem. So those four systems are going to be compromised, and we're going to hit the medical system early from something called allostatic load. Mm-hmm. Allostatic load is the price we pay for having to adapt to life's slings and arrows. Interpersonal stress in our relationship, which represents home, is it has to be reduced to a home because the world is stressful, and you and I represent home. We cannot afford to increase threat and allostatic load because it's pointless. Why be pair bonded, right? The outcome is very similar to loneliness, which we now know also shortens lifespan, leads to mental illness and physical illness. So there's a real practical biological reason here. And then, of course, there's a trajectory with couples that do not take care of stress quickly, do not get in and out of stress fast. They have to know how to do this and how to talk about stressful topics without going to war. Very hard to do. But the alternative is worse. Mm-hmm. The alternative is bad. So we have to learn. Mm-hmm. We have to learn the rules of engagement and how to talk with each other in a manner that's collaborative and cooperative, even when we're under great stress.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the wheels come off and we won't handle the weather that's coming.
And that's sort of what you do throughout this book, is break down in these conversations, where did it become war and what other paths could have been taken that would have been constructive and lead to quick relief and repair.
Here's a quick example, because I saw the thing pop up about 10 minutes. Here's an example. You and I start to talk about something that bugs us or a problem with our kids or something. Mm-hmm. If you and I start working on each other instead of the problem, that's war. If we don't work on the problem as a third thing that we're working on together as a puzzle, and we work on each other immediately, mm-hmm. we go to war every time, because nobody likes that. Mm-hmm. That's considered threatening, and we do that all the time. I think, if it wasn't for you, then, that wouldn't have happened. If you'd only be this, if you'd only be that, I think you're the problem. So that's what we do. And that's something we can't afford to do in this kind of a system. Can't.
Yeah.
Try it and see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you wrote, it's one partner's responsibility to make the other partner feel safe and secure.
Yep.
And as I thought about this, I'm always looking for, places in my own life where I struggle with this. And what came up for me is where a need for safety and security is in direct conflict with another need, like vitality or adventure or connection. And to make it personal, we all come in with baggage or with trauma from earlier in life, right? Like,
Yes.
when I was 16, I had a partner break an agreement, cheat on me at a party. And now I'm 40 years old. And when my partner's off at a party and I'm not there, I'm nervous, right? I'm suffering.
What did the original do at a party?
Oh, he broke an agreement by being sexual with somebody else.
Bastard.
Agreed. But he was 16 and I was 16. So, now I'm a 40-year-old who has some stress, some trauma, some distress in that very particular instance. But I'm loath to ask my partner not to go do things that bring them love, joy, vitality, the goodness of life. So this is a simple example of, needs being in conflict, and not necessarily being rational needs, but just being like, hey, this is distressing. How do you advise people on these things?
Well, first of all, that's normal. We're memory animals. Everything we do is by memory. Very little we do with critical thinking. We even pick by memory. We even stay away from somebody by memory, right? You look like somebody I don't like, so I stay away from you. You look like somebody I love. No, I want to meet you, right? Everything we do is by memory. So it makes sense. We are formed, our behavior is formed by our experiences with everybody that made us feel great intensity again, or horrible intensity, right? Long-term memory. So it makes sense. And that's going to happen. That's part of the reason why love relationships are the hardest, because it has a long memory and we're proxies for everybody that came before. We're avatars, actors, each having the bite that fits the other's wound because of the way we actually select each other. So very hard, very hard. But there's an opportunity here for healing and for dealing with memory and not inflaming it. Is it not fair to talk to a partner about what will keep us both feeling safe and secure at all times? Because if we don't do that, we cannot create anything. We can't influence each other. We can't do much. Safety and security is the bedrock of relationships. Without it, we don't trust each other, or we wonder, and that takes time, energy, expenditure, stress, and it makes everything much more difficult. So that has to be protected at all times. What would make us feel protected? Doesn't mean you can't go to a party, but I want to make sure that I'm your person, unless we have a different agreement. Mm-hmm. Unless we, right? All things predicate
totally.
is predicated on what we designed. You and I designed as our structure. We're the architects. And so we find where we agree and we're the same. And then we work downward to what we can do that's good for both of us, win-win, and we modify as needed. Working that way gets out of jealousy, gets out of trying to control another person. Good for me, good for you. But let's start where we agree. Do we both want to feel safe and secure? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do we both want to be free of being of having jealousy stimulated by thirds? Thirds meaning, if we're a dyadic system, anything that competes with our system, right? And if so, how are we going to deal with those, right? So everything is talked about in that way. You can come up with something that protects yourself and your partner at the same time, that is not restricting. Now, here's the thing. If I don't take seriously that I'm in charge, I'm responsible for your felt sense of safety and security, which I can prove is true. Don't go back to, that's my responsibility. It isn't. This is all interpersonal, folks. Mm-hmm. It is much more efficient for me, for you to be in my care, and for me to guarantee safety and security for you. And when I don't, fix it. you do that for me, then it's in my best interest to always shore that up with you, because if I don't, you're going to start to act very strange, right? Because of feeling insecure or unsafe. That's going to be a burden for me, because it's going to be harder for me to work with you because you're feeling insecure. When we feel insecure, especially in attachment realm, that's an existential matter. And we think it's about love. It isn't. It's actually an existential threat, because attachment is a biological mandate to stick together. We think it's love. It isn't. It's a survival issue going all the way back to infancy. If mommy dies, I die. So we have to understand that attachment both brings us together or holds us together, but it also keeps us together even when we shouldn't be. It's the I can't quit you biology. Therefore, we have to respect it. Otherwise, there's trouble.
Yeah.
Right. So it's in my best interest to make sure you are constant. If I see a flash of insecurity, I'm on it. You are my person. You are my person. You're the most important person to me. I would not do anything to threaten that. That would be suicide for me. So guaranteed. If I'm doing that, there's much more freedom for me and you. A lot of people won't even do that. And then they see their partner as jealous and stingy and rigid, not realizing they're creating that problem.
Right. It's such a downward spiral from there.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is how we work.
It
Any
is.
other thing is a fantasy. Yeah.
Okay. This is so good. In a moment, we're going to transition to Q&A. So for our listeners, if there are questions you're wanting to get out there, go ahead and type them in. One more question for you before we do that.
Sure.
You know, the choice to sign on to partnership and truly to attachment with somebody is massive. And so much of the suffering that I see around relationships is I'm in and I don't know if I should get out, or I'm contemplating going all the way in and I don't know, is this the person? Are we aligned? You know, do we go for this or not? How would you guide people to navigate that question of in or out?
Well, first of all, if this is the beginning of a relationship, keep in mind that in the beginning during courtship, we're actually on endogenous drugs.
We're high all the time. Yeah.
We're high, and our judgment is completely, kaput, which is why we have our social network to vet for us. It's always been done that way. You ask your friends, what do we look like together? Do you like the way I am? Do I see myself with this person? Do you like this person? Young and old, male, female, everybody. You want their feedback. This is how it's always been done. So that's a checks and balances for you. The question about whether I'm in or out shouldn't be anything other than, is this person playing fair? Are they a good faith actor? Because if they're not, that's not somebody I can be in the foxhole with. Remember, our lives depend on each other, and I could go down the line and prove that when we're together in this kind of situation, unless you have a different arrangement. So a lot of this is not a luxury, it's a necessity. If you are thinking differently than I am, if you want something different, again, that's a deal breaker. We either have to sell each other and get each other on board completely, or we can't do it, just can't. So that's one. Two, if you're with a bad faith actor, somebody who doesn't keep to agreements, but be careful, because in my experience, most people who don't keep agreements, the fault lies in the agreement process. Most people are very poor at making proper agreements. You have to do it formally. You have to do it in a way that's rigorous to be convinced that you're making this agreement because you want this selfishly for yourself. I want this selfishly for myself. It can never be you're doing it for me, or I'm doing it to escape a problem. That will never work. We have to drink the Kool-Aid and convince I'm adopting this principle, this value, this guardrail because I believe in myself. That's who I want to be. That's what I think is right. That's what I think is good. Otherwise, I'm not going to come through when I don't feel like it. So secure functioning is basically a set of principles based on a purpose or set of purpose, right? Not emotion, that we do because we both believe it's the best thing we could do or the right thing we could do, even though it'll be the hardest to do. That's a good life. That's growing up.
Oh, that's a good closing line there. It's not about, does this person make me happy? Do we have chemistry? Are we compatible? It's, are we both signed on to creating a good life? Go ahead.
My wife and I live this. So obviously we have to, otherwise we're phonies. It's hard. I'm as stubborn and selfish as anybody else. I'm a pain in the ass. But we do this. And I can tell you, the love I have for my partner is earned. It is not the same that I had when we were in junior high and high school because I had a crush on her. It is totally and completely earned every day. Our respect for each other, our admiration for each other every day. That's because of what we do based on discipline, based on what we understand. It is hard to do, but I got to tell you, it is so worth it. And it's going to make me want to cry. It is worth it. It's worth every bit of the effort. Because those are feelings that sustain. They're not just passing like weather, waiting for it to, I feel in love with you again, which won't happen unless you build in behaviors, principles, guardrails, things that you're going to do every day, not because you feel like it, but because you know it's going to be rewarding and increase your lifestyle, increase your happiness. That's what I want for people to learn.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, we've got some folks with questions here, and I will read them and welcome your thoughts wherever they go. One audience member writes, how do I start a conversation with my partner on the guiding principles and bring them into the fold of your work without becoming their teacher or mentor?
Great question. Suggest to your partner, why don't we separately write what our idea today is the perfect relationship with person X, not my actual partner, but fill in the blank, person X, because otherwise it'll be sullied with memory and injustices. Person X, what would be not the perfect person, the perfect relationship? Start with safety and security, then go to love, affection, sex, then go to spirituality, then go to growth, then go to purpose in life as a couple. I'm giving suggestions categorically just to stimulate, but to separate them. We do what? We do, not I do, not you do. We do this. Make it pithy enough, pithy and simple enough for a 5-year-old to understand it. Think of it as golden rules. Think of it as your 10 commandments. Think of it as your Declaration of Independence, whatever. But it's, what must that relationship be that's worth my while? Since we're all going to be dead soon, we don't know when. That's my future. And then compare. We get together and we look. You'll probably come up with the same things. Sometimes people clearly write in a complaint they have about their partner, and it's clear. It's not a we, it's you. But try not to do that, right? That's where I think is a good place to start. Starting also with, and this is hard, what will be your central organizing purpose? Like, what is everything? If you're building something top down or bottom up, you have the top. If you're religious, we serve God. Okay, that's an organizing idea. purpose, right? And then everything has to agree with it going downward. We serve each other. We're the top of the food chain. Our relationship comes first. People are going to complain. First, above everyone and everything else. Why would you do that? Well, if you're thinking logistically, if the two of us are leaders, if two of us are in charge of everyone and everything, we have to be in tip-top shape or everyone's screwed. Everyone is only as good as we are. Our kids, our family, our work, our creativity, our career, only as good as we are. If we're not working well together, if we're not okay, we lack resources to do everything else because they're being used by threat and interpersonal stress. It doesn't make sense. So we have to come first in order to serve all the responsibilities we have. That's one way of looking at it, right? It's not, you put your kids in a closet and give them kibble, right? This has a real decision-making process, a way of ordering things so that the couple stays intact, because the couple started this thing and hopefully is moving through time as time travelers. They must stay together in order to accomplish all the things they want to. That's one way of looking at it. Or our careers could come first. That's fine if we fully agree. Can't really complain about sex because, hey, your career's okay. Or parenting comes first. Okay, can't really complain about, us not being a great couple because we're parents. That's fine. That's fine. But you have to agree, and you have to be sure the other person's completely on board and not bending reality because they're afraid of losing the relationship. It has to be gut, wrenching honest. That's how you do it. And it's fun. I mean, you're creating something out of nothing. And that's an enjoyable process. At least I think it should be. And so nothing to avoid. It is, you're creating your life going forward. You're creating this thing that is going to feed you, serve you, protect you, because you agree to do it. And if one of you doesn't do it, you both get hurt. Better luck next time.
There's so much there about attachment and the fear of losing the relationship and how that drives us. Yeah.
We're always afraid of loss. That's why clinicians should know that you're never getting the truth if you're working with couples ever. You're dealing with people who, one, lie, as I do, we do, to protect our interests. It's not evil. It's just what we do. We don't want to lose anything. Mislead, because of the same thing. And the main reason is that we mostly don't know what we're doing at any given moment or why, because real time is too fast. We're operating by memory. If you ask me why I did that, if I don't know, I'll make something up. That's how we roll. That's how we roll. And so we have to understand how the brain works. Most everything we're doing was decided even up to a minute before we were conscious, subcortically. The primitive areas of our brain are really in charge. Sorry.
Well, here's a question that might relate to that then. An audience member writes, how can I learn to self-soothe and regulate when experiencing waves of emotion and anxiety?
Well, there are a lot of ways to self-soothe, but if you're in a partnership, it's more efficient to work as a co-regulatory team. So let's take Liz and I. The way we're wired psychobiologically is I can see in close proximity, because I'm using a different visual system when I'm up close, which focuses on the eyes in particular, the upper part of the face. That is if I don't have a problem in an area of the brain called the fusiform gyrus, right? So So I focus on the face. We love the face. The brain loves the face in close-up because we're visual animals above all. And so as I'm with Liz, I can see what's going on in Liz before she knows it. Mm. She can see what's going on in me before I know it. Why are we wired that way? When we go to war, we're at a distance. We're looking at striated muscles. We're looking at movements to predict what the other person's going to do before we spear them, right? But up close, love is up close, right? Lust is at a distance. Love is up close. We start to interactively regulate, which is something we do at the very beginning in infancy. It's right there. First external regulation by the caregiver, and then right after that, an observer cannot tell who's leading and who's following. That's how we got together. And so that is the very, very best way to operate, is to use each other for regulation, not just self-regulation. Self-regulation has to be there as a capacity. Otherwise, you'd probably be in jail. But it doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have to be great, because co-regulation is greater than the sum of its parts. It's a phenomenology that we don't really understand, but we can observe it. Now, self-regulatory techniques. There are wonderful ones. One is insight meditation, Vipassana in particular, because that is the only one that's a discipline of working to tolerate pain, thoughts that are arising, pain in the body, and so on. We know that builds out areas of the brain in the front and in the back, and that it actually does something in terms of building our capacity to not only witness ourselves, which is a prefrontal cortex ability, but also to sit through these and not suffer by relaxing and accepting. So that's one. Doesn't really transfer sometimes directly to when you go live with a person. The other is to relax your body continuously. If you're with your partner and you're live, is to do outside meditation, not inside, because it looks like you go away and that's threatening to the other person. It's called a still phase. So I pay attention to Liz. I start watching her, all the details in her eyes, in her the striated muscles in her face, color changes from blood flow. I start to, like a scientist or an artist, I'm watching every detail, and I'm constantly relaxing my body moment by moment. That keeps me relaxed and alert. And it keeps me from moving out of window of tolerance into fight or flight, a hypothalamic state, or into collapse. That's another technique. Also good for people who are socially anxious. I don't like being at parties. I don't like, I get really anxious. I learn, I'm going to study that person who's talking to me, their face. For them, I'm attentive. For me, I'm interfering with self-talk, and I relax my body. That's a good way to get around that. It works because I can't do both at the same time. I can't keep my eyes visually watching and moving, right? And engage in self-talk. I can only do one or the other. That's another technique. There are a lot of them, and the technology is generally the same, whether it's meditation or whether it is journaling, which many people don't have the time to do. One of my favorites is I do this in private. I will self-soothe. I'll touch my chest, and I'll talk to myself aloud. What I'm doing is every thought and feeling that arises, I say aloud in the third person. And the third person is very important. There was a study on this. I know you're feeling this right now. I know right now you're telling yourself you're an idiot. I know you feel like a failure. I keep doing that. And I just naturally now call myself Stanley, which is what I was called as a child. So if you have the name that were you called, do that, because that's stored very early in the right amygdala, right and left. So all of this builds what's called, Peter Fonagy calls a reflective function, something that parents should do. I'm simply saying aloud what is going on in the movie that I'm playing. Except when I say it aloud, it creates a distance from it. And it creates a witness state where I actually my own parent. I'm not telling myself how great I am. I'm simply stating aloud everything I know. I know you right now you're feeling you're terrible. I could say, but you're not. No, no problem. But even if you just did that aloud, that's a really good technique. It may not make you feel better immediately, but that's not why you do it. Just like meditation is not going to make you feel better. It's going to make you feel worse because it's hard. But you're doing it because you're building a muscle that is a parental witness state that is watching and commenting, which most of us never learn to do. And then we look to other people to do it, right? When we could do it. Nothing wrong with looking to other people, but if you don't have somebody, there should be somebody there, and that's you. That's another one. So I got lots of them, but all of them are very simple and very similar. It's about creating a witness state. Either you're writing, or you're saying aloud, or you're talking in a tape recorder as if you're telling somebody that you're imagining. All of these do the same thing. It builds out and operates the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is more cognitive, and not as easily co-opted by the limbic system as the ventral medial, which is really hooked into strongly into the limbic area and can be co-opted by emotion and by the reward circuit. So we want that witness state. We want that part of us that is a parent to ourselves, because those parents are gone or never were, or we're inadequate. It's just us. And are we being responsible? Or are we shitty parents?
Or a little of each. Thank you for that. I have another question here.
Sure. Sorry, I'm so long-winded. My wife tells me, everyone tells me I'm so long-winded.
All good. There's a lot coming out here. So this person writes, from your experience counseling couples that experience conflict later in their relationship, how would you advise early stage couples on creating a contract of shared agreements together?
Well, okay. The first part of that was conflict.
I think the question is saying, you've worked with a lot of couples who've had conflict later in their relationship. And then this person's saying, how would you advise early stage couples on creating a contract of shared agreements together?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm very much a prevention person. I love premarital. I love. I wish everybody would do it for everything. I wish they'd go to learn about step parenting before jumping into it. Because that's where we can predict what people will be fighting about for the next 30 years and how to put in place good skill sets for not accruing threat memory. That's going to be the big problem. So as opposed to people I see 30 years down the line, and they are so biologically shifted that they cannot even go for a moment without fighting. Not because they're bad people, but because they're both convinced the other person is not safe. They did that, by the way. So I would say, first of all, take care of anything that's a problem immediately or very shortly after. Memory sucks. Do not refer to something that happened earlier in the day or in the evening. Go forward. Don't go backward, because you'll argue about memory. No, I didn't say that. No, that wasn't at 6 o'clock. It was at 7. Don't do it. You'll fall into a trap everyone gets into and you won't get out. Right? So going into the past, don't do it. Talk only about what you predict for the next, right? Know what's done and what's next. Always go forward, unless you're reminiscing about something nice. Be careful never to work on each other when under stress. You'll do it. Everyone does. But when you catch yourself, apologize. I'm sorry, bad start. We've have a problem, and this is because I could do the same thing to you that you do to me. How do we deal with this? So remember, you are you are working on problems that arise constantly, whether it's between the two of you, one of you, someone else, so on. Learn to work the problem, not each other. That's a discipline, right? Otherwise, you won't get anything done. Be face-to-face, eye to eye. Don't go to the side. We're legally blind on the sides, and the amygdala fires more feverishly when there's a face at a glance. So why set yourself up for a fight? Don't do it on the phone. Can't see the face. We visually correct, error correct, more than we do with sound. Sound is good, prosody, very important. But if I can't see you, I'm still seeing you with my inner eye. If I'm unhappy, I'm not seeing a good you, and it's static. So better to see you in real time and keep my eyes on you, because then I can stay in the game, which is a present, moment by moment, fast moving game. I've got to pay attention, and I got to watch you, especially when I talk. So eye to eye, face to face, slow it down. Error correcting areas of the brain not only require a lot of oxygen and glucose to run, which is getting in short supply when we're under stress, but also there's a speed factor. If we go too fast, I can't error correct. They're slow. These areas are very slow. So I'm going to be more automatic, more reflexive, and more likely to be unfriendly if I go too fast. So that's a practical matter. This is all practical. This is across the board with people, folks. It's everybody. Always think about the other person's interests at the same time you're thinking about you. As soon as I give Liz the idea I'm thinking only about myself, she will do the same. Every time, she will do the same. And now, without realizing it, we're congealed and we're working against each other. Personal narratives are bullshit. Personal narratives is the narrative I build around problems I have with Liz. They're all designed to protect my interests only, based on some data, some truths, but molded and shaped in a way that supports my internal argument that this problem is her. Therefore, stay away. Stay away from personal narratives. Start thinking as a two-person psychological system. It's a team sport. I have to consider you and me at the same time, or you'll think that I don't care at all. And you have every reason to.
Yeah.
People in the field of bargaining, of negotiating, especially high-level negotiators, know this. They know this. They know how they're sitting primes the other person for something either hard or easy, soft or hard. They know that they have to study the person that they're dealing with, the animal that you picked, your partner. You better know the animal you're with. They're not you. If you don't know that animal, you're going to get bitten, right? And it's your fault, not theirs. So I have to be a master at Liz. I have to know how to handle this without using a stick or a whip. That's my job. That's my career. It's my responsibility. I'm in the foxhole with her. I need to know her. My life depends on it. If I say I can't handle this, why did I pick her? It's like getting a horse you could never have handled. That's unfair to the horse and you. You have a duty. If I pick you, I have to learn you, and I have to study you, and I have to be very good at you. You have to be very good at me. Otherwise, I'm incompetent. And I don't like myself when I'm incompetent. And if I can't manage you, I don't like you.
There's a lot in that. Okay, so the picking part is really, really important. And since we probably can't all go do premarital counseling with you, is there any kind of template or guide or process that you would advise people to walk through in the forming stage of a relationship so they don't miss big things?
Well, we do. The book prior to this was really intended to be, a manual for getting into a relationship, but also being and staying in a relationship too. So there's that. So the question again, just once more, that question you just asked me.
Yeah. How would you, it sounds like the previous book, which is Wired for Dating.
Oh, that's actually that came right after Wired for Love.
There's so
I
many
mean,
books.
it's
Okay.
it's a silly title. Who's wired for dating? But anyway,
Okay.
yeah, that came after Wired for Love. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like you have written the manual for early stage relationships who are really trying to assess, are we ready to do this together? And what are the conversations we need to have before we truly pick each other?
That's we do. Yeah.
We
Especially
do.
we do.
Perfect. Okay. That is probably what this question asker needs, is to read the book We Do. Stan, we are running low on time here, and I feel like I could ask you questions all night. Is there anything that I haven't asked you or that you want to make sure you get into the space here?
There's so much, people are fascinating. We're fascinating. We are. If only we'd be more fascinated and less, critical, judgy, hard on the other person. If only we're more curious than furious. If only we actually took our relationships as seriously as we do our careers, because it is a career, we'd be good. We'd be good. But we're mostly, again, sloppy, self-centered, lazy creatures. We do the least amount necessary, and we get what we pay for. We don't pay much, we don't get much. Secure functioning is hard to do, but worth it. It's hard for me. It's hard for everybody because of our nature. Stubborn, prideful, righteous. We have to be right. And then add to that our memory of unfairness and trauma. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong indeed? Well, thank you for making this your life's work. Thank you for all you've written about it. Thank you for talking with us tonight. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you to our audience for being here and for sending us your questions. If folks are looking to get a copy of the book, we always recommend your local independent bookstore. CIIS has a partner bookstore that's Marcus Books in Oakland. Thank you so much, Stan. Thank you to everyone.
You're lovely to interact with. You just are, and you have a great smile.
Oh, thank you. You're kind, and it's really, really a pleasure to hear from your work of many years. So thank you to everyone, and good night.
Good night.